So my name is Mike. I'm the manager of habitat restoration here at Duke Farms. I have been working here for 10 and a half years. And, in addition to the things that Lori just said, my personal and professional passion is largely fueled by deer management and how it affects the ecology of the region that we live in. And as Lori also said, I have a pretty good deal of experience with not just this deer management program, but others in the Tri-County area, if you will. I've participated in them, created them, implemented them, recruited for them, sat on a deer management advisory committee in Hopewell Township for a number of years. And it's just something that has been a great professional influence for me, and I've got a lot of experience and a lot of knowledge from because I've had the opportunity to learn from a lot of great people. And one of the things that Mark and I were talking about before this started is like, how do you get into hunting, whether it's like recreational or deer management focused, or like how do you get into it? And my story is a little bit interesting because I think something that is commonly found is that people who hunt have a tradition of hunting in their family. It's like, like their parents did it, or, their mentor, whoever it may be, or there's like, grandparents' farm that they had access to. And that's really, really wonderful. But there's also a pretty decent amount of people who don't have that as a lifestyle when they're young. And I was actually in that boat. I did not grow up in a hunting family. There was no tradition of deer hunting or deer management. And actually, ironically, I was a vegetarian for 14 years, from birth till age 14. And that kind of gets a chuckle out of some people. But when I was a kid, I remember I used to go on Saturdays to get pizza with my dad for lunch. That's what we did every weekend. And I was probably about 5 years old, and we were in the town I grew up in this pizzeria we always went to. And it was late September, and these two gentlemen walked in. They had clearly just finished, hunting, and they were coming to get lunch. And this one gentleman, he's got his camo on, and he had a quiver just like that, and it was swinging on his hip as he walked in. And I remember just being like mesmerized by the arrows, and I will never forget they had like real feathered fletching, and they were purple and yellow. And for some reason, it was just like the draw was always there for me, but there was not a venue for me to like exercise it or pursue it. So fast forward, when I was 14, I told my parents, I think I want to get into deer hunting. And they said, we respect that if you want to do it, but you have to make, sort of an adult decision to no longer be a vegetarian, because we'll support you trying something new, but you can't like take a deer just for the sake of taking it. You have to consume it. And it was like a hard decision for me, because I was kind of diverting away from what my family did. And I slept on it for quite a while and ended up pursuing it. And now nobody in my family is a vegetarian. Seriously. So anyway, that's just, I don't know, a little bit about me. Nothing to do with deer management at Duke Farms, but that's a little bit of my background. So into the presentation in front of me, deer management at Duke Farms. So this first slide is a picture from this property. It was taken in skeet shoot fields, which is part of what we refer to as the western fields, western portion of the property. Skeet shoot fields currently is one of our premium grassland breeding bird habitats on this property, and arguably in the state. It's just under 200 acres. It has been in active grassland management for over a decade. And this particular picture was taken in 2001, before any real deer management was happening here. And so when we used to do, you could do nightly surveys, there was in excess of 150 deer every single night in this field, in this 189 acre field. In this picture alone, I think there's like 42 or 43. So this is just a tiny little snapshot of what this property used to have in terms of deer density. This is an aerial map of the entire property itself. Skeet shoot is This is the skeet shoot fields I was just talking about, so that's about 200 acres just for context. The entire property itself is about 2,700 acres. We are bordered by Raritan to the north, Manville to the east, Hillsborough to the south and west. And so basically what that equates to is we're surrounded by development. And our property historically has acted as a sink for resident suburban and urban deer populations all around our property border. And so the story of this deer management program is kind of a unique one, and it's a very long-standing one. And so where we initially began, when I say where we began, I'm talking about prior to 2004, which is when our deer management program officially started. So prior to 2004, there was no meaningful deer management whatsoever. And when I say meaningful, I mean deer management with a focus on antlerless or female population reduction. There's always the occasional hunter that sneaks in here or there, but nothing that affected the actual density. And on the contrary, there were so many deer here that there was staff that were part of their job was to supplementally feed them through the winter and into the early spring, because there was so little food left. The carrying capacity of this property was basically surpassed. And just for context, 250 deer per square mile, which is what we used to have, multiplied by the acreage of this property, which equates to about 4.2 square miles, was roughly 1,100 deer living on this property in any given year, which is just unbelievable. Oh, there it is. And actually there was some of the deer that did pass away over the course of the winter, just to sort of like prove the point that the carrying capacity was totally surpassed. We had the state do necropsies on multiple deer that had been deceased, and they were proven to have died from malnutrition, which is sad. It's a shame. When you have deer densities in that range, one of the first things that really suffers from a ecological landscape perspective is your forest understory. Your forest is supposed to be made up of 4 layers. Starting on the ground, you have your herbaceous layer, and then your shrub, sapling, tree, recruit layer, which is eventually going to be the last and 4th layer, the overstory layer. And if you are familiar with plant ID and you look at this picture, you will see there is literally one native layer, which is the overstory tree layer that the deer can't reach. And everything else is completely devoid of native plant species. And it's your standard host of barberry, wineberry, and winged euonymus, all of which are invasive, commonly used landscape plants, and largely unpalatable to deer, which is why they're surviving in this this density. The picture on the right is actually from Skeet Shoot Field in the early spring, mid-spring, like late April. It looks like an army of landscapers came through and just cut everything up to the browse line, which is basically as far as a deer's head can reach up, and they eat it and it's gone. This is not a super geographically diverse property. It's fairly flat. In the park area, which we call the core, you could literally see from one side to the other, which is 640 acres. It's 1 square mile currently. It's all fenced in, but you could literally see from one end to the other on a clear day. There was nothing there. And here's an example of the winged euonymus I'm talking about, just a common ornamental, frequently used landscape plant that deer shouldn't even really be eating, but because there's nothing left, this is what they're left to consume, and the browse line is like really, really obvious. So basically, what we did in 1999 was set up a very preliminary exclusionary fence just to see what would grow in the absence of deer. And in 1 year, the difference is very obvious, visually obvious. The first thing that came back was herbaceous layer regeneration. And of note, we had a lot of spring ephemerals that came back, which showed that they were always there. They were just waiting for an opportunity to not be eaten. And Virginia bluebells were one of the most common. And following that, there was woody tree regeneration, namely red oak and sugar maple. So this exclusionary fence basically gave us a justification to say, look, this is what should be growing. This is why it's not growing. There's too many deer. We have to do something about it. And so we were denied the ability to implement a management program at that point in time. And so the next sort of evolution of deer removal was to experiment with a trap and transfer program, which at this time you would never be allowed to do for fear of disease transmission, such as chronic wasting disease, for example. But we did get permission to do it from the years of 2000 to 2003. So as you can see, 259 deer were removed over a 3-year period, which was extremely expensive. 22 years ago, it was $1,400 a deer. And so basically 259 deer cost us $362,600 to trap and transfer. And that transfer permit was issued by the New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection with support from Rutgers University. So it was, I mean, it was an experimental operation, but basically it had no meaningful reduction on our resident deer herd. Additionally, it's also very stressful for the animal to go through that process, and the survival rate after you release them is probably not preferable. So basically what this trap and transfer program or operation looked like was semi-permanent, sort of like funnels that were created. And inside, once you went through the funnel, there was I forget what they used. It was like a sweet horse feed as bait to draw the deer in, and it absolutely worked. But again, even that process is very labor intensive, and the number of deer removed just didn't keep up with the fecundity rate of the animals themselves. So once we had them in the corral, they got loaded into a trailer and taken. I'm actually not 100% sure where they got taken to. Somewhere else, not this property. So more or less, we had no deer management for a long time, exclusionary fencing, which proved how much regeneration potential there actually was, a denial of a lethal management program, an experimental trap and transfer. It didn't work. And so now we're basically coming begging, like, please, we've got to do something legitimate. And so we had to get approval from a variety of agencies, individuals, and experts. And these are literally all entities that were involved prior to 2004 to come up with this strategy. And basically what the strategy included is a multi-stepped program plan, and it combined exclusionary fencing, which we now have and have had for a long time inside the park, controlled management for the duration of the state mandated hunting season with a volunteer deer management team, agricultural depredation. Basically what that is, if you're not familiar with it, if you have standing traditional crops, soybeans, alfalfa, corn, something like that, and you can prove a financial loss due to an overabundant deer herd consuming that crop, you can get permission to remove deer lethally outside of the state hunting season. The state hunting season is generally September to February, which is not when you're growing soybeans and corn. So this generally takes place over the summer, and you would be issued a predetermined number of tags if you were to keep the venison for your own consumption. Otherwise, it's basically just remove them. We also implemented a professional sharpshooting firm for the initial kickoff of this program to accomplish what we refer to as a saturation hunt. And from the beginning all the way up till now, what is a very critical component of this program are highly organized deer drives. Basically, what a deer drive is a given part of the property that you have people set up on the ground on foot, which is your drive line, and they have consistent spacing from each participant to each participant. And what they'll do is walk in a given habitat at a slow pace and try to maintain whatever orientation they start with. If it's a straight line, everybody tries to keep a straight line. If it's sort of like a curved horseshoe, you try to keep that horseshoe. And you're communicating via radio. And as you slowly walk, any deer that are in that habitat, that forest, wherever you may be, they get encouraged to move, away from you. Where they're being bumped or pushed or driven to, you would have a deer management team stationed in an elevated position like a tree stand. And what it creates is a situation where you can harvest a high number of animals in a very short period of time. And it's been a very important part of our program overall. So when this program started, there's a great deal of interest from hunters from all over the place. It's what a lot of hunters, recreational hunters, would refer to as a target-rich environment. And so they wanted to participate for, obviously we wanted it for ecological improvement. They want it for, a recreational interest, and it's sort of a mutually, or it's a benefits each other. But more hunters is not always better. And I'll explain why a little later, but long story short, we had 300 applicants initially, which is a lot of applicants to go through. And we used a number of methodology to sort of like whittle that number down, like proficiency, shoots, mandatory orientation. You have to have liability paperwork and go through, sort of like a vetting process. And so basically we went from 300 to 70, and those 70 participants were broken into 10 teams throughout the property, which 70 people is still a lot, to be honest with you. But it was a big drop from the initial 300 candidate pool. And to this day, we actually still require qualifying shoots. Our team now is 15 people, me being one of them, and my director, my boss, Tom Almendinger. And so one of the reasons we do this is it's sort of a historically implemented part of our program, but also there's some amount of like encouragement to be proficient with the equipment you're going out with. And there's something very different, just personally speaking, about being in front of a group of your team members, and you're expected to be able to perform at a certain level. And now when you're having to do it in front of people, it's like if you played golf and you're at the driving range, it's probably different when you're by yourself versus like all your friends behind you watching what you're doing. And it really does. It encourages, consistency in your marksmanship. And it's something that's been important for us. So first season that we kicked this thing off, 2004, we harvested 608 deer from 2,700 acres. 281 of them were female from this, where literally the area we're sitting right now, the farm. 111 male from this area, and then the park is, where all of our visitors go to now inside the fence, which the numbers are obviously much lower in the fence now than they were then, but it was still a substantial amount, 132 female and 84 male. And so this slide is as simple as it is this is something that I am probably the most proud of when it comes to this deer management program, because this might sound harsh, but any average hunter can harvest deer where there are a lot of deer to be harvested. And it's easy to maintain somebody's interest as a hunter when there's a lot of opportunity. But there's been a lot of research that shows when herd densities dip below 50 deer per square mile, recreational interest starts to drop. And the reason is because people are not doing this professionally. They're taking vacation days, they're taking time off of work, whatever whatever their situation may be, and they want to see deer when they go hunting. They want to have the opportunity to take one home. And so when you're starting at over 200 per square mile, you're going to get a deer every time you go out. You start dropping below 50, now it's a quarter of that. It's a big difference. So in 2 years of management hunting, we took our herd resident density from 200 plus to 34 per square mile. And what I really like to see is for all the years, I only have this till 2019, but from 2006 until I have numbers to 2022, our herd density has sort of ebbed and flowed between the highest is 38 and the lowest is just above 17 and a quarter, 17 per square mile. That's a very hard thing to accomplish. And it's the people that are still with this program are very dedicated to the reason that we're doing it, which is for ecological health and biodiversity. And if that's not something that a hunter values, then honestly, it's going to be hard pressed to keep their interest in a program that is this successful for this long. So yeah, basically the average that we have maintained for almost 2 decades is 27.2 deer per square mile. It's an 89% reduction in our pre-management estimates. Just for context, I live in Hopewell Township, and doing spotlight density surveys with the Division of Fish and Wildlife every year for almost the last decade, with the exception of years where we experienced EHD, blue tongue disease. Hopewell's deer density is somewhere between 90 and 110 per square mile. It's a lot. That's a lot. Now, this property was double that. And you think about those numbers, it's unreal. So to drop it 89% and keep it like that for 20 years, you're doing something. And what the result of that is a really unbelievable increase in native plant composition in our meadows, successional forests, old growth forests, etc. So what this graph basically is very simply illustrating is the increase in native plant cover compared to invasive plant cover from our program's inception over the last almost 20 years. And some of our woodlots and habitats have done better than others. Obviously, inside the fence has done exceptionally well, which is where oak woods, migration woods, all the names up top are coming from. But oak woods saw almost a 90% increase in native plant cover. Like, that's unheard of. And there are two anomalies. The two on the bottom, Oasis and EWPP East. Basically, what we're speculating is those isolated habitats had such poor native seed stock in the soil to begin with that the deer were actually eating the invasives that were growing there. Remove an overabundance of deer, the invasives just took off and sort of like took up the dirt, took up the area where anything, so nothing else germinated. So I can't say it's 100% perfect, but it's almost perfect. Anyway, just a couple data sets here. This is, there's still people that are can be sensitive to the topic of deer management for obvious reasons. It's a little bit controversial in some conversations, but there's a lot of good that comes out of it. That's human-centered. That's not strictly, ecology is obviously benefits humans too, but it's not, this is 100% human-centered. We've donated, what is this? So this is through 2018, but tens of thousands of pounds of venison have been donated in the last 20 years. Over 100,000 servings have been provided to people in need at local food banks and shelters. And it's one way to give back and further justify outside of the borders of this property the positive impact that this program and programs like it can and will have. So there's a lot of deer management programs in this state and other states. I've been involved, like Lori said, in over 10. There's some pretty critical components to this one and why it has been so successful and why we have an 89% reduction in resident deer herd over a 2-decade period. And the first is, from the very beginning, you have to have clear objectives. Everybody who's involved needs to understand that this is not like a trophy buck recreational hunt. This is for the sole purpose of reducing our resident deer herd. So if you are successful, every year you go out, the following year should be more challenging to do what you're out there to do. And you just have to like accept that. One way to make sure that that stays implemented is to have annual harvest goals and individual quotas per hunter. That's not unique to us. There's a lot of programs that do that, especially with a focus on that quota being derived from female harvest. Yes, a buck is another mouth that's eating, native plant material and is rubbing sapling trees and all of this. But if you remove one buck, any other buck can still breed does to increase the population. But when you remove a female, you eliminated the breeding potential. And that's where you really get your herd reduction from. Communication and coordination. So on 2,700 acres, whether we are doing deer management or monitoring native plant response or doing invasive species control, it's very easy to like chase your tail because it's such a big property. So for the purpose of a hunting context, the whole property is broken down into zones. It's in our case, it's lettered zones like M or L or whatever. And it's typically one or maybe two hunters who are designated, their permanent spot is that zone on the property. And in our case, that comes out to be like 80 to 100 acres per hunter, which is plenty of room. So you know where you're going and where your responsibility lies. There's a lead hunter coordinator within the group. In our case, it's actually not an employee. He's a volunteer who has been here since 2004 and has really shown a lot of ownership and leadership and just like commitment to what we're doing. And so if there's, communication between myself or other staff and the deer management team, it's a very linear venue to go through him. He also tends to be, kind of like push the issue and just in terms of rule enforcement, not that we ever have any issues, but just if something needs to be stated or reiterated, or let's say a new gate where there's cows is being locked, he's going to make sure that everybody knows this is where you can go, this is where you can't. Simple logistical things. We all have each other's information. We have a regular preseason meeting every year. All of our team members, the deer management team members, know each other, which vehicles we all drive. Just have a familiarity with who you're in the woods with, which is important. And we do provide incentives and rewards for basically good work. And there's absolutely no tolerance for rule breaking whatsoever. An example of an incentive might be, so we actually provide bait material free of charge, like Duke pays for that, which is I don't know anywhere else that does that. Another incentive might be if you have an exceptional couple years of deer harvest. Like I said, if you are really productive in your zone will become less productive because you've done your job. So maybe that person gets temporary access somewhere else so they can continue that good work. Things like that. The zero tolerance part, the people who are here have been here for so long that they're all great. There's no issues, but historically there have been, and you're out. It's just that simple. Oh, this is basically the breakdown of the property zone wise. Mostly similarly sized with the exception of east of 206. So incentives. This is a little bit interesting. There's something called quality deer management. And The methodology of quality deer management is basically to let antlered bucks that have good antler genetics or good antler potential grow to become of an exceptionally large size, simply put. And I did say before that this program is very much about herd reduction and female deer harvest. But I bring props to make my point for this. Deer hunting as an industry is almost completely based and motivated by and like driven by big bucks. Everybody that you talk to is out there to get a trophy buck, to put it on the wall, to brag about, to send pictures like that. It's almost impossible to break that. And so these are just like normal hunting items and paraphernalia that I have. This is just a tree stand seat for, just a cushion for your rear end. This is a block for sighting in, so your equipment is accurate. This is laundry detergent that eliminates human scent because the deer's sense of smells, it's number one. Basically, ability to avoid predation. Their sense of smell is incredible. These are just field knives. That's a corn enhancer. That's a cornless bait / attractant. Peterson's bow hunting, deer and deer hunting, North American whitetail. Do you see what everything on here has antlers on it? Like, these are to attract deer. This is to keep deer from smelling you. This is to process deer. That's to sit in a tree. Like, it's all about deer hunting, but it's all marketed and geared and like showcasing huge bucks with big antlers. Like, it's a tough thing to break. And I bring all this stuff in to show that I think to people who don't hunt or are unfamiliar with it, it almost seems like silly. And I could see why, but like, that's what drives everything. So having a quality deer management principle in our context, basically what it means is we know that we have an exceptionally low resident deer herd, but we want people to be motivated to continue to hunt here, to continue to harvest those female deer. So how do you do that? Short of like paying somebody or whatever. One of the biggest motivators for a hunter is a gigantic buck that they won't have access to anywhere else. So if you have this relatively small, cohesive team like we have, and there's an understanding that, if it's got 6 points or more, let it go. If it's got 8 points or more, let it, or, whatever it is that you're doing. There's this sort of like universal rule that's applied that we want this buck to become this buck. And when he does, somebody might be fortunate enough to get it. But in the meantime, while you're spending time in the woods looking for it, there's going to be does that you are expected to harvest as well. So it's a weird, I get some flack for that sometimes because people are like, oh, I thought this was a management program. Why are you growing big bucks? It's a way to keep people interested. And over a 20-year period, it's the same group of men and women. Like, they've proven that that's not the only thing that motivates them. They're doing what needs to be done. It's just a component. It's one incentive. And it's probably one of the more productive ones. As I said, we provide materials for baiting. Fertilizer costs have gone up. Buying corn is expensive. Having bait provided is a nice incentive for the people in this program. This is always interesting. When you donate a deer, if you harvest one and you don't want it, or you don't have anybody that needs the meat, obviously you can't just waste it. You got to do something with it. That's where all those donation poundages came from. It costs money because somebody has to pay the butcher to process it and package it and ship it out to a food bank. We actually cover butchering fees for any size deer. Duke just gets a bill at the end of the year and they write Duke Farms Deer Management Program and boom. So they're not limited by my freezer's full or I don't want to pay for the butchering. We cover that, that's a big one. And then on sort of a friendly competition level, we do keep a running log of like who has harvested what. And so there's a little bit of like friendly camaraderie competition and like who's the best hunter. You know what I mean? Which is always fun. And obviously, we closely monitor this program for success, and honestly, areas that maybe harvests have decreased a little bit. One of the ways we're doing that is by utilizing drone flyover surveys that we do multiple times a year. We've been doing 2 in the winter during hunting season to assess where herd distribution is in the presence of hunting pressure. And then we do 2 post-season, which is usually like, it's either the end of February and March or March and April. We compare that to the ones that we do during hunting season and see like how the deer herd has moved. Is that in relation to the first available food source or a lack of hunting pressure? And it's been very interesting to sort of analyze the trends over the years. And we sort of correlate that with annual vegetation surveys. And those are of critical importance just to basically say, like, are we harvesting enough? Because a lot of people will say like, okay, I have a deer management program. What's a good number of deer to harvest? Not everybody has access to a drone flyover, but you could do all the drone flyovers in the world and say, you know, we've harvested this many deer for this many years. If your native vegetation response is not trending in a positive direction, you are not doing enough, because that's the reason you're doing it. And it's a really black and white way to say, like, is this working or is this not working? Are we removing enough or are we not? And over a, 19, 20-year period to see native and invasive plant trends go like this to where we're seeing an 89-90% increase in oak woods, I think we're harvesting enough. But you have to have baseline and annual measurements to track your progress. And it takes a lot of effort. Just an example of some of the post-season drone work. And then before and after pictures, these are taken the exact same location. There's roughly 15 years in between these pictures. One is Japanese barberry, and it looks like wineberry, and then a bunch of native sapling recruits, which will be next year's overstory. This is our champion red oak on Oakway. As you can see, it was just like golf course flat on the left, and on the right, the limbs grow basically to the ground. The leaves touch the ground and they don't get browsed. And this is the goal. This is what we're going for. Basically a well-stratified forest with really obvious and full and diverse layers from herbaceous to shrub to sapling to overstory.